Rosalie Kowalczyk clocks in at 11 at night. The thermostat in her break room reads 58 degrees. That's the room they gave her. A fridge that hasn't run since 2021. 4 chairs for a shift of 31 people. She didn't file a complaint. She'd stopped expecting the one she filed to matter. There's more. 2 feet of clear packing tape holds a cracked window against a Lake Erie January. The microwave door won't stay shut, so you hold it with one hand while it runs. The vending machine takes cards. Nobody on nights carries cards. They carry quarters. So 31 people ate alone, every night, in parked trucks in the dark. Then one Wednesday she brought in a hot plate from a yard sale, a $12 pot, and an empty coffee can. That can change everything on that shift. I'll show you how. If you believe it's never too late for the heart, this story is for you. Before we go further, subscribe because this channel is for the people the world forgets to look at. And tell me down in the comments what shift you work. First, second, or third. I want to see who's up at 3 in the morning watching this. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let me take you back to the beginning. Halvorsen Molded Plastics sits on a frontage road outside Erie, Pennsylvania. It makes plastic parts, housings, brackets, the small things inside the machines you never think about. It runs 3 shifts. The overnight is the one nobody talks about. Rosalie is the only woman on it, 11 years now. Her night has a shape, and she keeps to it. She clocks in at 11. She pulls the big mop and the yellow bucket first. She does the front offices while the day shift smell is still in them. Coffee gone cold, somebody's lunch in the trash, then the hallways, then the floor scrubber, the ride on one. Slow up and down the aisles between the presses while the machines hiss and thunk and breathe their hot plastic breath. She knows every crack in that concrete. She knows which drain backs up when it rains. She knows the sound a press makes right before it needs Walt. Around 2 in the morning, she does the dumpster run. She wheels the cans out the back dock, one at a time, into the cold. The cold out there is a real thing. It comes off the lake and finds the gap in your collar. She's got a coat for it, a good one, finally, this year. And then, at some point in the deepest part of the night, she takes her 30 minutes. Her break. In the room nobody else will use. She likes it. That's the part people never understand. She likes the quiet. The rest of the shift ate in their trucks because the break room was miserable. But Rosalie had learned a long time ago to take what nobody wanted, because what nobody wanted came without a fight. She'd sit in one of the 4 chairs. She'd eat whatever she'd brought. A sandwich, usually, sometimes leftovers cold from the container, because the microwave was more trouble than it was worth. And she'd have her 30 minutes of nobody needing anything from her. That was the math of her happiness. 30 minutes. There was other math too. Harder math. Her daughter was gone. Not dead. Gone the other way. The way that's worse in some hours. The addiction took her out of the picture 2 years back, and it took her clean. No forwarding address. What it left behind was Cody. 12 years old. Rosalie's grandson. And now Rosalie's boy. So the month worked like this. Her base pay covered the rent and the lights and the car. The overnight differential, that little extra they pay you for working while the world sleeps, that covered Cody. His shoes. His school lunch account, which she kept a few dollars ahead of always. Because she would sooner go without her own lunch than have a lunch lady tell that boy his account was empty in front of the other kids. She knew what that felt like. She'd been a kid with an empty account once. She didn't feel sorry for herself about any of it. That's the thing you have to understand about Rosalie. There was no self-pity in her. It had all burned off years ago, like fog off a field. What was left was just the work, and the boy, and 30 minutes of quiet. She was good at her job, better than good. When something broke, they called Walt, and when Walt couldn't get to it, they called Rosalie, because Rosalie had watched Walt for 11 years and picked up more than anyone gave her credit for. She could reset the scrubber when it threw a code. She could clear the compactor jam. She kept the whole back half of that building running on nights, and she did it without a word, and the day shift walked in every morning onto clean floors, and never once wondered how. That was the deal. That was fine. The cruelty in this story, and there is cruelty, doesn't come from a person. Remember that. Nobody at Halvorsen woke up meaning to be cruel to Rosalie Kowalczyk. The cruelty was in the building itself, in what the building decided was worth spending money on, and what it didn't. Let me show you the room. The whole room. As a fact, not a complaint. Because Rosalie never made it a complaint. The fridge in the corner was a full-size one, white, with a handle that had gone yellow. It had not run since 2021. Somewhere in there a compressor had died, and instead of fixing it or hauling it out, somebody had just unplugged it and left it standing, like a headstone. If you opened it, and nobody did, it smelled like the inside of an old cooler. So it sat there, big and dead, and taking up the corner. The window was the worst part in winter. It had cracked at some point, a long diagonal line across the lower pane, and the repair, if you could call it that, was packing tape. Clear packing tape, laid over the crack, strip on strip, until there was a good 2 feet of it, cloudy and peeling at the edges. On a January night, with the lake wind pushing on that glass, you could feel the cold come through the tape like the tape wasn't even there, which it nearly wasn't. The thermostat on the wall read 58. It always read 58 in the deep of winter, because the heat in that wing was set low after the day shift left, and the break room was at the far end of the run where the warm air gave up. There were 4 chairs. Plastic, stackable, the kind that bites the back of your legs. 4. For 31 people. Not that 31 people ever came. But 4. The microwave sat on a folding table, and its door latch was broken, so the light wouldn't stay on and the plate wouldn't turn unless you held the door shut with one hand the whole time it ran. Try warming up soup one-handed while you hold a door. You learn to just eat it cold. And the vending machine. This one's almost funny. Corporate had swapped all the vending in the building to a new cashless system. Tap your card, tap your phone. Clean, modern, except the overnight crowd at a plastics plant outside Erie is a cash crowd. A quarters in the ashtray crowd. So the machine that was supposed to feed them at 3 in the morning took a form of money none of them carried. It just glowed there, full of chips and candy, behind glass, wanting a card. It might as well have been a museum case. So, that was the room. Dead fridge. Taped window. 58 degrees. 4 chairs. A microwave you held shut. A vending machine full of food you couldn't buy. That was the room they gave the night janitor. Now here's the small thing that mattered. The thing Rosalie filed away without meaning to. One night, early winter, Walt was up on the ladder in that room replacing a ballast in the ceiling. One of the long tubes had started to flicker and hum, and Walt fixed things the night they broke. That was Walt. Rosalie was wiping down the folding table, and neither of them was really talking, because neither of them was much for it. But Walt, up there with the ballast in his hands, looked around the room once. Just looked. At the fridge, the window, the chairs. And he said, mostly to himself, been on the deferred list since before the last manager. Rosalie didn't say anything. Nobody's ever going to spend a nickel on a room the day shift doesn't see, Walt said. He clicked the new tube in. The light steadied. He came down the ladder, folded it, and left. Deferred list. The day shift doesn't see it. Nobody's ever going to spend a nickel. She wasn't trying to remember it. But some sentences find a shelf in you anyway. And that one went up on a shelf and sat there, in the back of her mind, through Christmas. Let me tell you about Walt, since he's up that ladder. Walt Dembski was the maintenance lead. He'd been at Halvorsen almost as long as Rosalie. He could fix anything. Presses, forklifts, the compressor on the loading dock, the boiler when it sulked in February. If it had a moving part, Walt could bring it back. He fixed everything in that plant. The only thing Walt couldn't fix was Walt. His wife, Ellen, had died 4 years earlier. Cancer, quick, and then not quick the way it goes. And after Ellen, Walt just poured himself into the machines. He came in early. He stayed late. He took no breaks, not one, hadn't in years. He'd eat a sandwich standing at his bench with a wrench still in his other hand. If you asked him how he was, he'd say can't complain and change the subject to whatever was broken. He mistook all that grief for loyalty. He told himself he worked because the plant needed him. The truth was he worked because working was the only place the ache went quiet. He still wore his wedding ring. He believed, though he'd never have said it out loud, that wanting anything again, any small, warm thing for himself, would be a kind of cheating on a woman who was gone. So he wanted nothing. He was useful, and he was unseen, and he told himself that was enough. There were others on that shift, and you'll meet them, because this is really a story about a room filling up. There was Dale Rutkowski, the overnight supervisor. Dale had taken every single one of his breaks in his truck since 2019. Rain, snow, heat, his truck. He'd sit out there in the lot with the engine running for the heat and the radio low, and he'd eat, and he'd come back in exactly on time. If you asked Dale how he was doing, something in his face would close like a garage door. He thought that closing was professionalism. He thought a supervisor who let people see him was a supervisor who'd lost the room. There were the two press operators, Marcus Ford and Trinan Yin. Different presses, different corners of the floor, but people talked about them the same way. Those two never eat, just work through. Chasing quota. Heads down, hands moving, no break. What nobody had connected yet, not even them, was that their part counts always dropped around 4 in the morning. Every night. Right around 4, the numbers sagged. They thought they were tired. They didn't know they were hungry. And there was Renata Voss, the quality tech, the youngest person on the overnight by a good 15 years, and new to Erie, no family here, no roots yet. Renata ate at her station. She'd unwrap something at her little quality bench under the good light and eat it there among the calipers and the reject bins. She wanted, more than she'd have admitted, to belong somewhere. But she was the kind who waits to be invited, and nobody on nights was in the habit of inviting anybody anywhere. Because everybody ate alone. That was the overnight at Halverson. 31 people, all in the same building, all in the same cold, every one of them alone. Now, the Wednesday. It was a Wednesday in January when Rosa Lee brought the hot plate in. She'd found it at a yard sale the fall before, a single electric burner, $8, coil element, a little rust on the housing but the coil glowed true when she tested it in the kitchen at home. She'd bought a pot to go with it at the thrift store, $12, enameled, a chip on the rim. And that Wednesday she'd made a soup at home in the afternoon before Cody got in from school. Just a soup, onion, carrot, a can of beans, some broth, a ham bone she'd been saving. Nothing. She brought it in a container. And on her break, in the cold room, she set the hot plate on the folding table, plugged it into the one outlet that worked, poured the soup into the $12 pot, and set it to warm. She told herself it was for her, just for her. It was cold, and she wanted something hot, and the microwave was a fight, and she was done fighting the microwave. That was all it was. But you cannot heat a pot of onion soup in a still building at 2 in the morning and keep it a secret. Smell travels down an empty hallway like it's looking for someone. At about 2:10, Marcus Ford appeared in the doorway. Marcus, who never ate, who worked straight through. He stood there in his safety glasses with the day's grime on his forearms, and he didn't come in, and he didn't say anything. He just stood at the edge of the room with a look on his face like a man who'd smelled something from a long time ago. Somebody's kitchen. Somebody's mother, maybe. Rosalie didn't make it a thing. That was the whole genius of her, though she'd never have called it genius. She didn't say, "Oh, are you hungry? Come in, sit down, let me get you a bowl." That would have put Marcus on the spot. That would have made it charity, and a proud man can't take charity at 2 in the morning in front of a dead fridge. She just got up, took the second thrift bowl she happened to have brought, ladled it full, and held it out to him. No words. Like it was the most ordinary thing in the world. Like he ate there every night. Marcus looked at the bowl. And then he took it. He sat down in one of the 4 plastic chairs. He ate the whole thing without a word, and when he was done, he rinsed the bowl in the little sink and set it in the rack and said, "Thanks, Rosie," quiet, and went back to his press. His 4 a.m. count did not drop that night. The next Wednesday, Wen came. Nobody had told him. Marcus wasn't a talker either. But somehow the word had crossed the floor the way things do on a shift, in a nod, in a glance, in the particular way a man will walk a little slower past a certain door. Trin came the next Wednesday, and he stood in the doorway the exact same way Marcus had, and Rosalie ladled him a bowl the exact same way. No fuss, no speech, and he sat down next to Marcus. And the two of them who never ate 2 people. That's where the room started. 2. Then came the can. The vending machine problem had been eating at her, the more she thought about it, because it was so stupid. All that food, right there, behind glass, and 30 people who had quarters in their pockets and no way to spend them because some office 3 states away had decided cash was over. She couldn't fix the machine. But she started thinking sideways about it. She had an empty Folgers can at home. The big one. The red plastic-lidded coffee can. She washed it out, and she cut a strip of masking tape and wrote on it in marker and stuck it to the side, and she brought it in and set it on the folding table next to the hot plate. The tape said, "Shift Fund. Take a coffee. Drop a quarter when you can." She'd bought a big tub of instant coffee to start it off. Not the good stuff. The kind that comes in a tub. She set that next to the can, and a sleeve of paper cups, and the electric kettle she'd also found for a couple dollars. And that was it. That was the whole enterprise. And then she watched something happen that she would think about for a long time. The can started to fill. Not fast. A quarter here. 2 quarters there. A man would come make himself a cup of instant at 3 in the morning and drop a quarter in the can, and the quarter would land on the other quarters with that small, bright sound. And because there was now a reason to walk into that room, and because there was a pot of something on the hot plate on Wednesdays, people started walking into that room. Within 2 weeks, there was enough in the can to buy more coffee and have money left over. So she bought bread, a couple loaves, and peanut butter, and a jar of the cheap grape jelly. And she set that on the table too, next to the fund. And now it wasn't just Wednesday soup. Now there was always something. A man could come in at 4 in the morning starving and make himself toast and drop a quarter and not be beholden to anybody. That was the thing. Nobody was beholden. It wasn't Rosalie feeding them. It was the shift feeding the shift, and Rosalie just held the can. That's why it worked. That's why men who would never take a handout would drop a quarter and take a coffee and call it square. The can filled, and a system that no office had planned, that no budget had funded, that had started with a washed-out Folgers can and a strip of masking tape, was quietly born on the overnight shift, out of things that had been thrown away. She kept building it, a little at a time, and she never spent much, and she never spent it on herself. There were 2 more chairs to start. She found them by the loading dock, headed for the dumpster. Somebody in the offices had gotten new chairs, and these old wooden ones were on their way out. Wobbly, one had a cracked rung. But they were real chairs, wooden ones, not the plastic biters. So instead of running them to the compactor, she ran them to the janitor closet, and over a few nights. On her breaks, she sanded them down and re-glued the joints and clamped them and let them set. And then there were 6 chairs in the room. 2 of them warm-colored wood. Then a lamp. She found a lamp at the thrift store, a floor lamp with a fabric shade, $5, and a couple of warm bulbs. And here's what that did. The overhead fluorescents in that room were the flat blue-white kind that make everybody look like they're in a hospital at the worst hour. So she started leaving them off. She'd click on the lamp instead. And the room went amber. Picture it. 3 in the morning. The whole plant floor is white and cold. That hard fluorescent glare on gray concrete. Machines going. Everything the color of a headache. And then down at the end of the hall, through the doorway, there's this one room glowing warm and gold like a window in a house at night. Like somewhere you'd want to be. Men started drifting toward that light without quite knowing why. And Walt noticed the microwave. Nobody asked him to. That's the whole point of Walt. He came through on his rounds one night, and he saw Rosalie standing there, holding the microwave door shut, with one hand while it hummed, warming somebody's bowl, and he didn't say anything, and he moved on. But on his next round, the following night, when the room was empty, he came in with a spring and a little bracket in his shirt pocket, and he fixed the latch. Right there. No note. No mention of it. He fixed it and he left. And the next time Rosalie went to warm something up, the door clicked shut on its own and stayed. And the plate turned, and the light came on and stayed on. She stood there in the amber light and watched the plate go around, both her hands free for the first time in years. And she knew exactly who. Of course she knew who. There was only one man in that building who fixed a thing the night he saw it break and never said a word about it after. She didn't thank him. She understood him well enough to know that thanking him would have been a kind of trespass. Walt didn't fix things to be thanked. Walt fixed things because a broken thing was a small grief he could actually do something about. And there were larger ones he couldn't. So she let it lie. But something passed between them anyway, in the silence, in the working latch. Something with no name on it yet. Around then, Renata started coming. The young, quality tech. New to Erie, eating alone at her bench, under the hard light. One night she had to walk past the break room, on her way to the reject cooler, and she saw the amber glow. And she saw a couple of the men in there with their toast and their instant coffee, easy, and she slowed down. And Rosalie, who missed nothing, caught her eye and just tipped her head toward the empty chairs. Not a word. Just, there's room. And Renata, who had been waiting her whole life to be invited somewhere, came in and sat down. 3 people. Then 4. Then more nights than not, there were people in the room. And somewhere in all of this, Rosalie stopped calling it, even in her own head, the break room. She started calling it just the room. Our room. The room. As in, I'll be in the room. As in, is anybody in the room tonight? It had become a place instead of a leftover. She never once thought of it as hers. She'd have laughed at that. It was just the room nobody wanted. And nobody wanting it was exactly why she'd been able to change it. Nobody watches the thing nobody values. She could sand a chair and hang a lamp and set out a coffee can, and no manager ever came down the hall to ask what she thought she was doing. Because no manager ever came down that hall at all. She was free precisely because she was invisible. She didn't know yet what that freedom would cost, or who would come down the hall eventually, or what he'd ask. But before that, there was Dale. Dale Rutkowski, the supervisor, who had eaten in his truck every night since 2019. Everybody else was coming into the warm room now, drifting in, dropping quarters. And Dale still went out to that cold parking lot with his lunch and sat in his cab with the engine running and the radio low. Rosalie watched him do it night after night, out into the dark, alone, on purpose. She understood it. She understood a man who thought that being alone was the same as being strong. She'd thought that herself, some years. Then came a night in the deep of that winter when the wind chill dropped into the single digits. Real cold. Cold that hurts your teeth. The kind of cold that comes off Lake Erie with something personal in it. And Dale, at his break time, put on his coat to go out to that truck, the way he did, and Rosalie watched him go, and she made a decision. She ladled a bowl of soup, she got the lid, she put her own coat on over her uniform. And she carried that bowl out the back dock and across the frozen lot to where Dale's truck sat idling with its exhaust, ghosting up white into the security light. She didn't open his door. She didn't knock and wait and make him say anything. She knew better than that. A man like Dale, if you make him receive it face to face, he'll refuse it just to keep his shape. So she tapped once on his window. Just once, with a knuckle. And she set the bowl of soup, with the lid on, right on the warm hood of his truck, over the engine, where it would stay hot, and then she turned around and walked back inside. She didn't watch. She didn't look back to see what he did. She let him have it in private, whatever he was going to do with it. That was the whole thing. A tap, a bowl on a hood, and her walking away into the cold with her breath streaming behind her. And the next Wednesday, for the first time in 3 years, Dale Rutkowski did not go out to his truck. He came down the hall. He stood in the doorway of the room, in the amber light, this closed-off man who thought a supervisor should never be seen needing anything. And the room was half full. Marcus and Churn at the table. Renata with a coffee. A couple of the others. And nobody made a thing of it. Because Rosalie had taught the whole room, without ever teaching a single lesson, how you let a proud person come in. You don't stare. You don't cheer. You just make room. Somebody slid a chair out with their foot, one of the wooden ones Rosalie had glued back together in the closet, and Dale sat down. And that should have been enough. A proud man in a chair. A room that had stopped being cold. But it kept going. The Wednesday after Dale came in, there were 2 soups. Rosalie hadn't planned it. Churn brought a pot of her own, something with lemongrass and a heat that cleared your sinuses, and she set it next to the $12 pot on the hot plate, like it had always belonged there. Nobody voted on it. It just happened. 2 pots, side by side, and people picking. Then a whiteboard showed up. Rosalie didn't buy it. She came in one night, and it was propped against the dead fridge, a little dry erase board with a shift sign column drawn on it in handwriting she didn't know. Weeks and names. Whose turn to bring the pot? Marcus had a Wednesday. Renata had one. Dale, of all people, had penciled his name in for the first Wednesday of the month, and next to it, in that same careful block print, he'd written chili. Rosalie stood there and read it twice. She never found out who bought the board. That was the thing about the room by then. It had started making itself. The rest of the shift came the way water finds a low spot. Slow, and then all at once. There was Petey from the loading dock, who'd worked there 9 years and never once eaten inside. There was the 2 forklift men, whose names Rosalie always mixed up, and she finally learned them because you learn a man's name when he's holding a paper cup in your light. There was the QC girl on the far line, and the sanitation guy, and the tool and die man who only spoke in numbers. One by one, arrival by arrival, the chairs filled, and then there weren't enough chairs. And men started standing along the wall with their bowls, leaning, talking low the way people do at 2 in the morning, when the machines are running themselves and the world is asleep. 31 people on the overnight. And most Wednesdays now, most of them came through that door. And here's the part nobody said out loud, because nobody had the words for it. The work got better. Marcus and Churn ran the big presses. And for years their counts had a dip in them, a soft spot right around 4 in the morning, when the body runs out of whatever it was running on. Scrap would tick up. A part would come out short. Dale saw it in the logs every night and never knew what it was. Because how do you write they're hungry in a production report? You don't. You just watch the number sag. The number stops sagging. A man with a bowl of soup in him at 2:30 holds steady at 4. That's all it was. No program, no memo, no motivational poster. Soup, the scrap rate came down. Dale wrote it in his log because it was true. and he put no reason next to it, because the reason was a $12 pot, and he didn't yet have the nerve to say so. And Walt kept fixing things. He'd done the microwave. Now Rosalie came in on a Tuesday, and the old thermostat on the wall, the one that read 58 at 3 in the morning like a joke nobody laughed at, had a new one next to it. Digital level Walt had run a fresh wire and mounted it clean and never said a word. That night, the room read 66. She stood under it and felt the difference on her face, the way you feel sun through a window in March. 66. It doesn't sound like much. 58 to 66. But it was the difference between a room you survived and a room you sat in. He started lingering. Not long. A minute more each week. He'd come in on his round, this big quiet man with keys on his belt, and he'd pour himself a coffee from the instant tub, and he'd drop a quarter in the Folgers can. He paid. The maintenance lead who could have taken anything in that plant, and he dropped his quarter like everybody else. Then he'd stand by the fixed window with his cup, not talking, just being in the warm for a minute, and then he'd go. But the minute got longer. Rosalie noticed. She was a woman who'd spent 11 years noticing things nobody else did. It was Renata who asked about the ring. Renata Voss, the youngest one on the whole overnight by 15 years, new to Erie, no family within 400 miles. She was the kind of young who still asks questions straight out. One night she nodded at Walt's left hand, at the gold band he still wore, and she said, "Easy, your wife working days?" And the room went a half-degree quiet, the way a room does when it knows something the new person doesn't. Walt looked at his cup. "Ellen," he said. Just that. Her name. And then nothing. And Renata was smart enough, young as she was, to let the nothing sit. Rosalie already knew. Everybody on nights knew. Ellen Dembski, 4 years gone now, the cancer that took 11 months to do it. Walt had come back to work the Monday after the funeral and never taken a full break since. He fixed everything in that plant, and nothing in himself. And the ring stayed on. So the room had a widower in it who talked in repairs, and a quality tech who ate at her station until she didn't, and a supervisor who'd found his way out of his truck, and 31 people who used to be alone and now weren't. And for a stretch of that winter, it just worked. It hummed. It was, though nobody would have dared call it this, happy. And then Greg Halvorsen came in on a Tuesday night. He never came in at night. He was days. Second generation ran the place his father built, a decent enough man in a plant logo polo who thought about the business and line items. But there was an insurance audit coming, and the carrier wanted a walkthrough, and Greg figured he'd do it himself on the overnight, so it didn't cost a day of production. So at 1:30 in the morning, he came down the hall he never walked, toward a light he didn't recognize. Because the break room was glowing. Amber, warm, the fluorescence off and the thrift lamp on, and the sound of people. He stopped in the doorway, and he saw it all at once, the way an owner sees. He didn't see a room full of his people at ease. He saw a hot plate. He saw an extension cord. He saw a lamp that wasn't on any equipment list, and a coffee can with a strip of tape on it and quarters in it, and 30-odd employees on the clock, in a room he had never in his life spent a single dollar on. Who authorized any of this? He didn't yell it. That was the worst part. He said it flat, the way you'd read a number that was wrong. And the room went still. The lamp hummed. Somebody's spoon stopped against a bowl. And Rosalie set down her ladle. 11 years. She knew this moment. She'd lived 100 versions of it. This was the part where the thing you built gets called a violation. And you're the one who built it. So you're the one who answers. She opened her mouth to take it, to say it was her, to keep it off everybody else. She didn't get the chance. I did, Dale said. The supervisor, sitting in a re-glued wooden chair with a bowl in his lap. He said it plain, and he didn't stand up to say it, which somehow made it worse for Greg, Because you can't argue with a man who won't even rise to defend himself. I did, Marcus said, from the wall. I did. That was Renata. Then Churn. Then Petey from the dock. Then the two forklift men whose names Rosalie had finally learned. Then the tool and die man who only spoke in numbers said it too. 3 words, I did. And it went around that room like a fuse, one voice lighting the next. Until Greg Halvorson was standing in the doorway of his own building being told by 29 people that they had each, personally, authorized a $12 pot. You could watch his face do the math and come up wrong every time. And into that, quiet, dry, Dale Rutkowski said the thing that took the floor out from under the whole argument. You gave her the one room nobody was ever going to fight over. Dale said, that's the only reason it got fixed. Greg looked at him. Fridge died in 2021, Dale went on. Not unkind, just true. Been on the deferred list since before you. Tape on that window 3 winters running. Nobody spent a nickel, because the day shift never sees this room. You didn't give her a break room, Mr. Halvorson. You gave her the room you'd already given up on. Nobody protects what nobody wants. That was the whole of it, sitting there in the warm air, and Greg Halvorson heard it. You could see he heard it. But hearing a true thing and knowing what to do about it are 2 different animals, and he was a man with an audit in the morning and a carrier who didn't care about soup. I understand, he said. And he did. That was the hell of it. But I have to do this by the book. That hot plate's a fire code problem. That can's a liability. Cash handling, no accounting. He rubbed his eyes. He looked, for a second, like a man who wished he'd stayed in his office. The room has to be cleared. Pending review. And there it was. Rosalie had known it was coming from the second he said, who authorized this. She'd known the way you know weather in your knee. So she didn't fight. Fighting was for people who still believed the fight was fair. She just nodded, and she wiped her hands on her apron, and she said, to the room more than to him. Don't make trouble on my account. Any of you. It's a good job. Keep it. She started to gather the pot. 11 years she'd been swallowing things exactly this size. She had a whole system for it. You keep your face level, and you keep your hands busy, and you get through the shift. And you go home before the sun, and you make your grandson's lunch, and you don't let him see. She'd have carried that hot plate out to her car with her chin up and never said a bitter word. But the shift wouldn't let it die. They didn't shout. That's not who they were. What they did was worse. For a by-the-book man. They documented. Dale filed a shift report, a real one, on the form, up the chain. And in it he laid out numbers, because numbers were the only language the building spoke. Scrap rate on the overnight, down, press counts at 4 a.m., holding where they used to fall. Unplanned absences on nights, the calling in, the didn't show, down to almost nothing since October. He didn't editorialize. He just put the room next to the numbers and let a man who thought in line items look at the line. And Renata, the quality tech, the youngest one, she added the piece Dale couldn't. Retention, she pulled it herself. Nobody had quit the overnight since the fall. Not one. On a shift that used to churn like a laundromat, where the young ones lasted a season and bolted, nobody had left. She wrote that down, and she signed it, and she sent it up too. They made the case in the only dialect management understood, and they made it without Rosalie asking them to. She found out it was happening after it had already happened, which is exactly how she'd have wanted it, and exactly why she'd never have allowed it. It took a few weeks. The room sat half dark and provisional, hot plate unplugged, can put away. And it felt to everybody like holding your breath. Then Greg Halvorson came back on a night. Not for an audit. He came at 2 a.m. in a coat, and he walked down that hall a second time, and this time the room was lit again, because Rosalie had quietly plugged the lamp back in the way you keep a pilot light going. He stood in the doorway, and Rosalie, because she was who she was, didn't wait for him to speak. She ladled a bowl. She carried it to him. She held it out. He took it. And then the owner of Halvorsen Molded Plastics sat down in a wooden chair that a janitor had sanded and re-glued in a supply closet, and he ate a bowl of soup made on an $8 hot plate. And when he was done, he stood up and walked to the folding table and took a paper cup and poured himself the free instant coffee. And then he reached in his pocket and he found a quarter and he dropped it in the Folgers can. The man who signed every check in the building, paying his quarter into a fund that ran on nobody's authority but its own. "Okay," he said. Quiet. He looked around the room, at the taped window, at the dead fridge, at the lamp and the chairs and the whiteboard with the names on it. "Okay, I'm going to do it right. Real fridge. A code kitchenette. Proper wiring. An actual coffee maker. I'll get it in the budget." He meant it. And it was good. It was genuinely good, and it was 9 months late. And the room knew both things at the same time. Rosalie thanked him. She was gracious. But later, driving home in the gray, she told Cody about it over the phone while she waited at a light. And what she said was, the room worked better before it had a budget. And she meant that too. Because a thing 30 people build out of quarters and garbage belongs to them, in a way a thing the company installs never quite will. She was glad for the fridge. She'd have traded it back in a second. The kitchenette came in month 7. Stainless, fine, slightly cold in the way new things are. But before that, in February, there was the window. The taped window. 2 feet of clear packing tape across a crack. 3 winters of it. The tape gone yellow and brittle, and the draft coming through anyway. A thin, cold knife of Lake Erie air that you felt on your neck if you sat in the wrong chair. It was the last cold thing in the room. Walt had fixed the microwave and the thermostat, but the window he'd left. Because a window is glass, and glass is a job, and a job is a reason to be there. He did it on a Wednesday. In the cold, he came in with the new pane wrapped in a moving blanket, and a putty knife, and a caulk gun, and he set up his ladder, and he opened that window to the February night so the whole room felt the real temperature of the world for a minute. And he started peeling the tape, 2 feet of it, off in long yellow strips, and under it, the old cracked glass. And he worked it out of the frame, shard by shard. Careful, his breath smoking, his big hands sure. Rosalie kept a pot going on the hot plate while he worked. Because that was her job in the room. Keep it warm. She ladled and she wiped, and she watched him, out of the corner of her eye, this widower on a ladder in the cold, taking the last broken thing out of the room and putting a whole one in its place. He set the new glass. He ran the bead of caulk clean around it. He pressed it home and held it and let it take. And when he stepped down off the ladder, the draft was gone. Just gone. The knife of cold that had lived in that room longer than most of them had worked there, and Walt had pulled it out with his hands, and the room went still and whole and warm, in a way it had never once been in 11 years. He stood there looking at it. Rosalie handed him a coffee. And Walt Dembski, who spoke in repairs and paid his quarter and had not put a full sentence toward anyone since they lowered Ellen into the ground, started talking. Ellen used to keep a pot going all winter, he said. He wasn't looking at Rosalie. He was looking at the new glass, at his own reflection in the black of it. On the stove. Didn't matter what. Just something warm, going. Saeed, it made the kitchen the warm room. And if the kitchen was the warm room, everybody ended up in the kitchen. He turned the cup in his hands. House could be freezing. Didn't matter. Everybody in the kitchen. Because that's where the pot was. Rosalie didn't say anything. She'd learned, in that room, when not to. I forgot a room could do that, Walt said. After she was gone, I stopped taking breaks. People thought it was. I don't know what they thought. Dedication. He almost laughed, and it didn't come out as one. Wasn't dedication. There was just nowhere I wanted to be. Break's only a break, if there's somewhere to go. He finally looked at her. This tired, careful, decent man. There is now. That was all. 3 words after 4 years of none. There is now. He didn't reach for her hand. He didn't say more than a widower could say. He just told her, in the only way a man like that can, that the room she built was the first place since Ellen that he'd wanted to be, and that a good part of the reason was her. And Rosalie Kowalczyk, who had never in 11 years asked for a single thing back, looked at him standing by the window he'd made whole, and she gave him the answer her whole life had made her fluent in. She didn't reach for him either. She looked at the cup going cool in his big hands, and she said, "Soft, your coffee's getting cold, Walt." And he understood her. He drank it. That was the yes. That's what it looked like. For two people that age, who'd both learned the hard way not to want things. A window with no tape on it. A pot on a hot plate. Your coffee's getting cold. Ellen's warm kitchen, 30 years and 100 miles away, was the reason any of it could happen, and nobody had to defeat her ghost to make room. She was the pattern the whole thing was cut from. Walt didn't stop wearing the ring. He just stopped standing in the cold. 6 months on, the kitchenette was in, and it was fine. Stainless fridge that actually ran. A real coffee maker with a carafe. Wiring up to code, a little sign about it from Greg's insurance people. It was clean, and it was correct, and it was, if you want the truth, a little bit sterile. Like a hotel version of a thing that used to be somebody's kitchen. So they kept the old stuff. Right there on the new counter. The $8 hot plate, and the $12 pot with the chip on the rim, and the Folgers can with the tape gone soft from handling. Somebody, Rosalie never knew who, again, had written under the old label. In Sharpie, for luck. And there it stayed. The official coffee maker made the coffee. But the can still sat next to it, and men still dropped a quarter in out of habit, and nobody ever emptied it. And the pot still came out on Wednesdays. 31 people. All of them, now in shifts across the night, eating in one warm room. The room they'd given her because nobody would fight for it. Greg brought a corporate visitor through once, some regional man in a better polo, and Rosalie heard him do it. He waved a hand at the room, proud of it now, and he called it an amenity investment. Great for retention. We're seeing real numbers. And Dale Rutkowski, walking past behind him with his clipboard, not even slowing down, said, "It's a pot of soup." Marcus taped a quarter to his badge, a permanent one, flat against the plastic, so he'd always have his drop. He said it was faster. Everybody knew it wasn't about faster. And on the Wednesdays Rosalie had off, Renata made the soup. The youngest one on the shift, the girl with no family and 400 miles, standing at the hot plate she used to be afraid she wasn't invited to touch, ladling out bowls for men twice her age, in a room that had taught her the one thing Erie hadn't yet, that you could belong somewhere just by showing up and being fed. 3 years later, Rosalie retired. 11 years became 14. Her knees told her before her heart did. And on her last night, 10 past 2 in the morning, she came down the hall to clock out. And she was not walked to the door by a supervisor with a form. She was walked to the room. The whole overnight was in it. Every chair full and the rest along the walls, 30-odd people at 2 in the morning who could have been sleeping. In the warm, waiting for her. The lamp on. The window clear and black and beaded with steam on the inside because the pot was going. Walt at the hot plate. Walt. Still there. Still fixing. Gray now. Stirring the $12 pot with the chip on the rim like it was the most important thing in the building. And at the coffee can, dropping in a quarter, a tall kid of 15 with his grandmother's steady hands. Cody, 12 when this all started. 15 now, and filling the Folgers can the way she'd filled it that first winter. And there was a chair pulled out for her. Not on the working side, not by the pot, where she'd stood for 14 years, ladle in hand, feeding everybody and eating last. They'd pulled out a chair on the other side of the table, the guest side. One of the wooden ones she'd sanded and re-glued in the closet with her own hands. All those years ago. And they sat her down in it, on the far side of her own table. For the first time in her life, and Walt set a bowl in front of her. And Rosalie Kowalczyk let somebody serve her the soup. She didn't make a speech. There wasn't one in her. She sat in the warm room, with the clear window and the amber light, on the side of the table she'd never once sat on, and she ate. Cody stood behind her chair, with his hand on her shoulder. Walt sat down across from her with his coffee and his ring, and his steady, quiet face, and the shift ate around them, and talked low, and it was 2 in the morning, and it was the warmest room in the building. They'd handed her the coldest room they had, the dead fridge, the taped window, the 58 degrees at 3 a.m. They gave it to her precisely because it was the one room nobody would ever bother to defend. And that exact thing, was the only reason on God's earth she'd ever been allowed to make it warm. If there's a room like that where you work, the cold one, the one nobody fights over, that's the one that's yours to change. Comment the shift you work, first, second, or third. I want to see who's still up, out there in the dark, keeping a pot going.